Oh, yeah! I'm English, British, and as a people, we're not particularly good at taking compliments. We find them embarrassing. Tend to deflect them. That's something I've been working on, trying to be able to just take a compliment and have it not bother me too much. But several people recently, I guess in the wake of the most recent social media blowouts, have said that I'm brave or strong or resilient, and while under duress I accept the compliment that is meant by these things, I find it very hard to see myself in that mould, cast in that way. I do not see myself as particularly strong or particularly resilient. You know, this is the guy who used to skip out on language lessons or PE lessons if he could, by faking an illness if necessary, or getting himself into such a tizzy that he threw up if necessary, or faking an asthma attack, or whatever it took to get out of doing something that I didn't want to do. You know, this is the kid who, as you know, very young kid, essentially chose to piss himself rather than to use the grotesque toilets at a school trip that we went on. Yeah, these aren't the actions of someone who's strong. I was bullied horrendously for a huge portion of my life, up until my late teens, really. That's not strong. Resilient maybe, but only by virtue of not really having a choice. So it's hard to see myself that way, especially when people are complimentary. You know, there's plenty of scars on my arm from moments when I haven't been strong enough, when I haven't coped, I haven't dealt with things, and in a way it's a sign of weakness that I'm still here, because I've never had the strength to go through with it. I've always turned aside at the last minute for one reason or another. You know, this is someone whose own mind rejects them and tries to tell them they're shit at everything and should just give up and crawl into a hole and die. Right? This isn't strength. Resilience, maybe. But to kind of pay it back to some of the people who are saying these lovely complimentary wrong things about me, I thought I'd tell you about some of the things I do to cope in life. Stoicism, male stoicism, I suppose, is something of a bad rap. It's meant to be some aspect of toxic masculinity, to not splash your emotions all over the place at the drop of a hat or whatever. And it certainly can be toxic taken to an extreme. My suicidal bouts tend to come about when I've been enduring something for a very long time and no longer can. But you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a lot of good in being stoic, in being resilient, in being enduring. If you push down something and you don't let it bother you, or don't let it appear to bother you, it will often wither away over time or become easier to deal with. In the moment when something bad or triggering is happening, it can be very useful to just kind of switch off, throw up the emotional armor, ignore that it's bothering you, and get that shit done, and then worry about it later. So stoicism can be good. It is my kind of main coping mechanism. I'm not traditionally masculine in a lot of ways, but when it comes to stoicism and endurance, I am. And while it has its drawbacks, I can't see it as entirely bad. Intellectualization, rationalization, taking the affairs of the heart into the affairs of the mind. This is also often seen as a male trait, and hence negative, unfortunately. But it's been very useful for me to be able to do that, and it's one of the very few things I took away as being useful from cognitive behavioural therapy, which by and large was a bust for me. But these intellectualization exercises, where you take something that is worrying you or triggering your anxiety or making you depressed or whatever, and you set your emotion aside, and then you work it through. You look at the pros and cons, figure out what's actually true and what's your mind playing tricks on you by an intellectualized, logical, rationalist exercise. And that's incredibly useful and quite powerful. And that's been a way that I've quite often dealt with a lot of things. People mistake that, I think, for being a Vulcan, for being a robot, for being uncaring about emotion. I'm trying to find a kind of happy middle ground between the two. While the process only works if you intellectualize and rationalize and detach your emotions, that doesn't mean you can't include emotions as a factor in that logical analysis. Emotions are important to people, they're powerful, they can override our rationality. It's just we shouldn't allow them to rule us, we shouldn't allow our passions to rule us. Decision making should be cool and intellectual and detached, but it should incorporate the emotional element. So if you're deciding whether to buy a new car, you might intellectually, and only intellectually, look at mileage, power, acceleration, comfort, things like that, and then emotionally, how does this make me feel, what kind of image does it project, and so on. But you can still incorporate those into your intellectual examination. So that's kind of where I am at the moment, trying to find a balance between the detached intellectual process and incorporating emotional aspects into that, emotional factors. The last idea that I want to touch on is a bit strange and a bit woo, I guess, or at least it might come off that way. One really powerful way to cope with things in your life is to kind of play a character. I came upon this by myself from role-playing games. If you form a particularly strong connection to a character, you can kind of put yourself in their headspace, and they might cope with the situation better than you do. So you can kind of think how they would act, what they would do, how they would react, that kind of thing. And almost in the same way as the intellectualization exercise, that allows you to take a step back and think, or to let things slide off you, not bother you, whatever the case may be. Of course, later on I found out that Grant Morrison had a name for this idea, which he used in the Invisibles, in other books of his, on the old message board that used to follow along with the Invisibles when that was coming out, and that's the idea of a fiction suit. Right, so that's the persona that you adopt. That's the self-insert, often in creative works, or who you would like to be, who you would aspire to be. And so it's an occult practice, as he presents it. For me, it isn't, of course. But there's little gems like that, like meditation, like fiction suits, that you can find in occult or religious practices, which can be divorced from the occult and religious practices and still prove to be useful. Even if you're an arch skeptomancer like I am, so things like meditation, like fiction suits, can be useful. So it's like taking on a persona. I guess Christians would call it, what would Jesus do? And they use that as a check upon themselves when they're about to do something. Of course, it's a check on their personal, generally fluffy image of Jesus rather than the actual mythic version of Jesus, but still, you get the point. So that's useful. So I hope, in exchange for the compliments, I've kind of argued back against them, but hopefully I've offered some things that might be usable to you as a suite of tools to deal with your issues, and have some of whatever it is you seemingly admire in me accessible to yourself. I hope so. Zang.